Today I'm going to do a quick video on various bits and pieces I have that make my life easier when dealing with retro computers. Now, some of this stuff is probably pretty common knowledge, but it's nice to have it all in one place. Now, this is kind of specific to PCs. Obviously, if you deal with Mac and Amiga and that kind of stuff, then there will be different tools that will make your life easier. So particularly focusing on the sort of 486, 386, 486 up until Pentium, Pentium 2 era, and even a bit later than that. Now, obviously, the first thing you pretty much always need is a screwdriver, and you can pretty much get away with a Phillips head screwdriver for 99% of everything you need to do. So find a screwdriver that you like, that works well, that's got good grip and not tiny, and that will definitely serve you well. So as computers get older, it can be hard to find space to store a CRT monitor, and so having VGA output can be difficult. Hard drives are becoming more unreliable. Finding working floppy disks are difficult. So there are a lot of these kind of things that there are some really great little things you can buy for fairly cheap that help you with that. So I still recommend having a CD-ROM drive. An IDE CD-ROM drive for me is still really useful. I still just have a copy of Windows 98 or whatever OS you want, and I still often install it via CD-ROM. Now, I think a lot of people probably use flash storage now, and you can probably write an image using an SD card or a compact flash. I still, where possible, like to use hard drives just because it adds a bit of charm to the machine. And even if you're using modern machines that have SATA and stuff like that, it still is often easier to install off a CD-ROM drive. Now, this particular one is actually a 2-speed. I don't actually know why I'm using it. I'm sure it wastes a lot of time, but it works. It's IDE, and yeah, it's pretty cool. So it's probably the oldest working media I have. And now I think for older machines that don't have native boot from CD or USB, a floppy drive is still very useful. And so I often have a floppy drive and a boot disk. But a lot of people are using like a floppy EMU and things like that these days. I haven't purchased one of them yet. It is on my list, or I think maybe that's the Mac one. It's the GoTech USB emulator. Those two I would like to get at some point, but I don't have them at this stage, and yeah, I just haven't picked them up. So yeah, definitely, if possible, having at least one working disk, and this one is actually an official Windows 98 boot disk. So definitely useful to have. That seems reliable, but a lot are difficult these days. So when you're dealing with older motherboards, they usually have AT power supplies, and a lot of those old power supplies are getting pretty crusty, and you don't want to blow up your machine. So there are lots of options. This is the cheapest. It simply converts a ATX to AT power, and then I've just added a little switch on here to make it easy to turn on and off. So that's great for testing. It's not the best. It doesn't pass through some of the other voltages. So that can cause issues with certain things, like if you've got old sound cards and things like that. But pretty much anything 486 onwards is usually fine with this and all the cards that you want to use. So definitely useful to have one of these, and these are really cheap to pick up on eBay. It is also nice to have a little speaker to attach to the motherboard if it doesn't have any onboard speaker. That just makes life a lot easier to troubleshoot any issues. Now, another issue I found when dealing with hard drives and IDE cables, and this one was actually quite annoying, is the later IDE cables are 80 pin, and they actually have this blanking spot here. So older motherboards don't have a slot there, and so you need to have a cable like this one, for example, that has all the pins. That can actually be quite annoying. Finding these older cables is difficult. I know some people drill out that there, and that works fine, but that's definitely becoming more annoying. So picking up some older IDE cables, I think it's like from DMA 66 or 100, you want the 80 pin cable to reduce crosstalk, but for retro computing it doesn't matter. So this is the kind of cable you want to try and get for your IDE. while on the topic of IDE, you can obviously use either a compact flash or a SD card adapter. I haven't actually used this one, so I don't know if it's any good, but I am planning on using that. So that can be quite useful. Obviously, there are various adapters. So old style keyboards that you get with Pentium and earlier, this DIN style connector, which I don't have any keyboards that have that connector anymore. It would be nice to, but I don't. So having just to a PS2 converter is a must. So that's definitely a no-brainer. PS2 mice and keyboard are still pretty easy to find. Unfortunately, serial is a real pain. Finding a serial mouse to purchase new these days is almost next to impossible. I purchased some new old stock and I was able to get this mouse, but like, look at it, it's terrible. So I mean, it's 3 buttons at least, but it's not a nice looking mouse. Yeah, I haven't actually had that much luck with various COM ports. One thing I didn't know is that there's actually a couple of different pinouts on this side of the connector here, depending on the motherboard. So if your COM port's not working, it can be that you've got the wrong adapter. I think if you pull this off, you can have a look at how it's wired. So that is an interesting one. For me, PS2 mouse, where possible, is infinitely better. So if you've got a Pentium, usually it'll have a PS2 header. Again, though, they're not standard. So you can have a PS2 connector that looks like this, or it's a more square block. Now, you can probably pop out all these wires and rewire it, but that is an annoying thing. I haven't found, like in America, I think you can get them for about $10, but then there's like $25 postage. So I don't have as many of these as I'd like. Definitely that is an annoying thing. But if you do have PS2, you can then easily convert it into a USB mouse and keyboard if you want. So that's definitely useful to have. Another thing with old machines is real-time clock batteries are dying. Now, I picked up a set of 3. These 2 of them have been replaced, but I've used 2 of them, but one of them's still new. So some machines won't boot if the CMOS battery is flat, and if they use one of these chips, the battery is integrated in here. So that's a real pain. A lot of people will like Dremel them open and put solder a battery on. If you can find some like this, they worked for me. Otherwise, people are starting to sell customized ones with the coin cell battery on top of it, so definitely worth picking up one of those. And these are pretty much always interchangeable. Like this one's the new one here, slightly different model number, but this one works and as a good replacement. I've kept these other 2 here. I might try and fix them up, but probably won't get time. Now, one thing that I have found really useful is this adapter here. This is about $15 on eBay, and it is an active adapter, so it requires USB power, but it converts VGA into HDMI. So this one I use all the time because I don't have a CRT monitor that's easily accessible anymore. Now, there is interference with it, so it's not the best, but in terms of when you're trying to just do some quick testing and stuff, this makes life so much easier. So you can even pass through the audio through it. I've never done that, but it definitely works well, and I've had it work with most resolutions, so it's been good. The only thing is sometimes it's a little slow, so you may not get your like VGA BIOS boot screen, which can be annoying, but otherwise this is a no-brainer. I do want to get like a proper VGA converter, but they're all a lot more expensive, and for $15 this is very much worth it. Another thing I found recently, and I actually want to do a separate video on this, is a video capture card. So you can have this plugged into your retro machine with a cheap with a HDMI cable to plug into here, and then you can use it to capture your video on your modern computer. So that's great for doing video capture. Again, it's not a high-end solution, so it's got limitations, but it'll do up to 1080p, and it's, again, there's about $15, and it's great. So that definitely a useful device to have for some basic VGA capture. Now, if you're doing any like more modern machines, you definitely want to have some thermal paste floating around. doesn't really matter what. It's just definitely worth having. Another thing I've found is getting old style socket 7 fans is now getting difficult. This is actually a socket 370. It's a little bit big. Sometimes the socket 370 fans, if they're small enough, will fit on a socket 7 motherboard. So yeah, finding fans can be a bit difficult. Now, probably the most useful thing for me is actually this network card. Now, I prefer to have all my retro machines networked. If they're behind a firewall and have NAT, I don't think there's a huge risk. It's not like you're going to browse anything on the internet. And the machines are so old that most viruses out there aren't even going to run on Windows 98. So I have no problems connecting my retro machines to the network, and I actually prefer to do it. Now, the reason I like this network card is that it has Windows 98 support built in. So I can get a 486 with PCI all the way up to a modern Pentium 4 machine, whack this card in, and then with my CD-ROM drive I can install the networking drivers, and then I can copy over all the various motherboard and VGA and sound card drivers. So I've got a little web server set up so I can download the drivers. I much prefer network than using USB or anything like that. So this particular video network card works out of the box with Windows 98, which is a big plus. Unfortunately, Windows 2000 doesn't have drivers for this. I've got an Intel network card that works in 2000 and also 98, but it's a 4-port network card, and I don't use it in Windows 98 because it takes 5 minutes to boot, because it seems to have like a timeout on each port waiting for DHCP. And I could disable DHCP, but it's just easier to have something that works out of the box. So obviously you need a PCI for this one. You can get like an NE2000 compatible ISA card. That's good for 486s and older. But this particular card has been incredibly useful. A couple of other little things. I bought a pack of these little jumper standoff things for when I redo heat sinks on video cards. I've had a few when I've got them from eBay. These have been snapped, and so you can buy like a pack of these for a couple of dollars, and these are just pretty much standard. Seem to work on all of the video cards that I've needed it for. So that's useful if you're like redoing thermal paste and want to replace the little connectors. So that's definitely a useful thing. So yeah, that's pretty much everything that I find useful. Look, there's a lot of different things here, obviously, and your mileage may vary depending on what devices you're using. But for me, this is kind of the standard stuff that makes dealing with 486s and sort of higher bearable. Otherwise, it can get a bit difficult. But yeah, I think really if you've got a media, that's useful. The network card's definitely useful. Some kind of boot disk, basically, to get you up and running that's sort of the first step, basically. And getting drivers onto a machine is always frustrating, so that's why this network card has just made life so much easier. So yeah, that's just a very quick rundown of some bits and pieces I have. I hope that that interests some people. Thanks.